Hello, you're listening to Do Yourself a Favour, the podcast about learning from experience and the things we do to make our lives easier. My name's Tim Sisney from Make Work Work Better, and each episode I'll be talking to my guests about their epiphanies, their inspirations, and the magic of their workflow. I am very, very happy today to be joined by Alice Lyons from Dark Coffee, who is a class follow on LinkedIn and one of my favourite people to get my mental health and well-being updates from on the internet. Alice, hello.
Hello, that was the best intro ever. Class act on LinkedIn. That's going to go in my bio now.
Do it. Would you like to tell everybody a little bit about yourself? What's your thing?
Yeah, sure. So, I'm Alice. I run Dark Coffee, which is my wellbeing company, and our whole remit is to help people be more badass in their work and in their wider lives outside of work. So that kind of looks like coaching. It looks like training. I do a podcast myself as well, which is also called Dark Coffee. I've been trying to rebrand it for about 4 months and it still hasn't happened. So chances are, if you look for Dark Coffee, it will still be called that. And I like to talk to people about anything and everything to do with work, well-being, and mental health. And that's just me, really.
Tell me about badass. Where did that come from? What's led to that?
What's led to the badassery? I think it was just my kind of attempt to differentiate from other people in the space, to be honest, because there were a lot of people. What I learned when I first went into the well-being kind of space was that there seemed to be two camps emerging. So on the one hand, it seemed to be the It's Okay to Be Okay brigade, who more often than not were a bit too softly, and I didn't really resonate with that approach. Like, as much as I agree with the sentiment, it's okay not to be okay, I don't know, I just found the language quite disempowering, and it almost like took the individual away from any ability to kind of coach themselves or help themselves. And based on my own kind of lived experience that brought me into the space, that just didn't resonate with me. And then on the other hand, there was like a very obnoxiously aggressive kind of, you can fight this, if you have a mental illness you can fight it, and kind of combative language on the other hand. And I was like, well, I don't really resonate with that approach either. So when it came to kind of creating my own content, I tried to do stuff that kind of fitted into both of those categories at one time or another. And then I kind of went in the middle, and then I was just trying to be, I don't know, something that I wasn't. And then eventually someone just kind of asked me, like, what do you want to do? How do you want to help people? And I was like, ultimately, everybody is a bit of a badass, and I just try and help them be more badass. And that's what I do. And it just kind of came out in a generic conversation somewhere. And then I was like, oh, I wonder if that would work if I put it into my marketing. It's a bit cheeky. Not everyone's going to get it. And it felt a bit scary to do. But actually, I found the more myself I was with my language and the way I present myself and my content, the more people kind of got it. And I thought, because it's one of those things, like, not a lot of us are doing anything completely unique. Like, if you look at an accountant, they are doing pretty much the same thing that every other accountant will do. They just put their own spin on it. So some of them will be very straight down the line and very sort of honest and everything's legit, and then you get your kind of crooked accountants and all the rest of it. But it's the same in any kind of industry. Like, we have to put our own spin on the stuff that we're doing, and that was just my way of doing it. And it seems to be working. I seem to attract my kind of weird folk, which is nice.
Well, I think there's something in it. I think in being very clearly the person that you are, and being open about that in your marketing, your materials, and the way you present them. That means you are going to attract the kind of people you want to work with. Whereas if you had a very sort of staid and vanilla marketing, then people might not then really get on with the way that your approach works.
Exactly. And my whole thing as well with my business is, I don't just want to do marketing and I don't just want to do sales to attract clients. That's not really why I started my own business. I want to work with cool people, and I want to, in lots of different ways, I want to create a cool network of people, and I want to go to events and talk to cool people and make cool friends and stuff. It's not just about, I get really sick of people talking about your marketing, like, think about your ideal client and speak only to them. It's great advice for making sales. It really is. Like, I get why people give that advice, but I'm not just in business just to make sales. I'm in it to have fun. I'm in it to meet interesting people in all sorts of different industries and different walks of life and all the rest of it. So yeah, I don't just do my marketing just for the purpose of making sales. I do it to put interesting information out, hopefully, or to entertain people. And then off of the back of that, I get lots of fulfilling relationships, not just people wanting to give me money. But the latter are always welcome, obviously.
It's also more fun to do it yourself.
Yes.
Like for you, if you enjoy it, isn't
Yeah,
it?
totally. I've tried the other way, and it doesn't really work because you fall out of love with it really quickly, and then you just think, oh, I need to do marketing because it's an item on my to-do list, and the strategy says I need to do that, and every book I've ever read about business ownership says you have to do this thing, but why? I can't. I don't know if I'm just like painfully naive, but I can't do stuff if I'm not kind of involved in the why behind it. If I don't find enough of the pull behind it, and for me, the best way to make something engaging is to make it more fun. Obviously, there are lots of things in business that are not fun to me. Like, I will never be good at my bookkeeping, and I will never do it unless my accountant tells me to do it. But I can get through that because I know ultimately why I'm doing it, and I make it as fun as I can.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I'll put some music on and I'll give myself a treat when I've done it, and those kind of things. I use a lot of like motivational things to get me to do my accounts. Otherwise, it would never get done.
So we're going to talk today about things that you've learnt, about the and the things that you've used and that you use on a daily basis to make your life easier. So I'd like to start off with, can you tell us about something you wish you'd known earlier?
I wish, this is a big one for me, I wish someone had told me that nobody else knows what they're doing either. Because I used to think when my mental health was really bad, like in my early to mid 20s, it was probably the worst, but it went on throughout my 20s. I wish someone would have said, hey, you know, everybody else on this bus, the ones that you're looking at, they don't know what they're doing either. Because I used to have this thing, I the only way I can describe it is I felt like I was a cat, and I was a cat pretending to be a human. I was like dressing up like a human every day and getting on the bus and going to work pretending to be a human, and everybody else on the bus looked like an actual human, and I would just be kind of pretending that I was like that. And I was like, ultimately, I just know I'm not like that. But the older I've gotten, the more I've spoken to people, the more I realize everybody's kind of doing the same. So it manifests in small and big ways. So some people would say that about their business. They're like, oh, I'm just making it up as I go along. And other people will be a lot more honest, and they'll be like, I don't know how to be an adult. I don't know how to raise my kids. Like, it'll show up in everyday life. And I never knew until about, I don't know, 4 years ago, maybe, that everybody else feels the same thing. And you can call it imposter syndrome, call it just a quirk of being human, I don't know. But oh my god, the number of years I drove myself mad with that thought. I just wish someone had clued me into that a little bit earlier.
What kind of a difference do you think it would have made if you had known that earlier?
I think it would have saved me a lot of heartbreak. It would have saved me beating myself up and feeling like I was weird and feeling like otherly is the word I'd use for it. I just felt so outside of society in a weird kind of secret way that I didn't tell anyone about it. It would most often be in those times when I was sort of on the bus on my way to work. I used to work in a coffee shop. I used to be a manager, and I used to make the journey across town. I used to get 2 buses to my coffee shop before the world was awake. So it was sort of 5:30, horrible o'clock in the morning. And it was just very lonely. I felt so lonely in those times, and I didn't have words to put to that feeling. It was so bizarre and isolating. So I think if I'd have just, I don't know if it was like the content I was consuming at the time, but social media was still relatively new at that point. It wasn't quite, you know, you get on the bus and you're scrolling straight away. It wasn't quite that prevalent back then. But I just think if I'd have tripped over a couple of accounts that had just kind of spoken about that, I think I just would have felt seen, and I would have felt more comfortable in my own skin. So those kind of things now impact my work now. So when I'm putting content out, especially like on Instagram, because it's so easy to trip over stuff on Instagram, I just love the thought of like one of my posts speaking to someone at a moment when they feel like they're so isolated, and just cutting through the noise and just being like, oh my god, it's not just me. It's normal to feel weird, and it's normal to feel othered, and it's normal to feel out of sorts with what everybody else is feeling. Yeah, I think it would have improved a lot of things, and that's a powerful thing.
Yeah, and it's true as well, because I think it is genuinely a universal feeling. I think it's the idea that you never really get to the stage where you've got everything nailed. There's always something that comes along that you've not got down. I don't think anybody listening to this, but I don't think anybody ever is going to go, you know, I'll reach the point where suddenly I get it. And if they do say it, they're lying. But also, I think there's that sense that I mean, I remember for a few years, I remember driving to work and I'd get out of the car and I'd walk to the office. And occasionally I'd just think to myself, I wonder what I'm going to do when I grow up. And it's like, and I'm there in my mid-30s kind of going, you've been doing this job a while, Tim, right? This is possibly it. Or maybe if you know, what is it if it's not what you do when you grow up? And so, yeah, I think I had a similar revelation at some point when someone pointed out to me that I think I seem to remember like there was a senior leader who was leaving who said something like, they will never get to a point when you're done and it will make sense. And I was like, what? What?
A traumatizing thought when you first hear it, isn't it? And then you kind of sit with it for a while and you're like, oh, it's like it's an ongoing process. There's never like a fixed end point until you die. Like that is the end point. But other than that, it's about, I think we're kind of trained and conditioned when we're younger to think that there are these benchmarks, and like when you hit this goal, then this magical like next level appears, and then you're like, oh, I get it, and you always understand every part of the journey, almost like when you watch a film, there's a very obvious like, here's the catalyst, here's the call to action, and then the hero does this, and then this is the plan, and the plan might change, but ultimately this is the goal. And like we're brought up on this narrative structure that makes us think that everything has a really tight, contained point, and that this section will make sense, and then the next chapter will open, and then that will make sense. And unfortunately our lives are not that tidy. They're a bit more chaotic than that. So sometimes you're going about your day-to-day life and you're kind of like, where is this going? I don't quite, what's my motivation? I don't understand. and then that's part of the fun as well, is I guess to find a bit of meaning, and I think I'll probably touch on that a little bit later on, but it's to kind of make your own sense in the mess that is your life, and to go, okay, well, what is the point of this chapter? Is there a point? If there isn't a point, can I just enjoy it while I'm going through it? Maybe the path will reveal itself as I'm going through the motions, who knows? But yeah, it's a weird one, that you look at all these adults who look from the outside like they've got all their shit together, and that's why I'm so fascinated with like badassery, and the people that I consider to be the most badass are the ones who are kind of unapologetically themselves, and they turn up as if they've got all their shit together, and they might not, but they just seem to have fun, and they seem to get fundamentally something about themselves that the rest of us are a bit like, oh, I wish I could have a bit of what that person's taking. And it's not that they're necessarily doing anything different from us, except for the fact that maybe they're more self-aware of how little they know, and then they've just kind of made peace with it, which is intrinsically cool, obviously.
Yeah, it's really it's something that I think when you get somebody who's kind of made peace with the idea that they don't have to know anything, then quite often they're often really interesting people to be around, because they're kind of like, well, you know, I don't know, let's find out. It's kind of how I wanted to be as a parent, was kind of like, you know, when you get the why questions, sort of like, why is that, Daddy? Why is that? And what I wanted to do is be a kind of, you know, I don't know, let's find out and let's look it up together. But frankly, after the sort of fifth or sixth why, you're kind of like, because I said so! Because it is.
It's like inspiration to being the cool, like inquisitive, let's get curious, kids, let's investigate the answer. And then the fatigue takes over.
That's right. I just there's only so much you can do on like 3 hours sleep.
I think that's what people don't tell you often, isn't it? It's like how tiring everything is. Like it's so tiring being an adult. And like, thankfully I don't have kids. I'm just in awe of you guys that can do it. But having a business in itself is just, that's something else I wish I learned. I wish someone had told me how tiring it is to make decisions 50 times a day. That is tiring. If you're struggling, that's okay.
Did you? I don't know whether you found the same thing, but that reduction in choice and decision making that the pandemic brought, I found really comforting.
It wasn't for me. I think because initially I had to move quite a lot, obviously from being in person to being online. I found it quite discombobulating for quite a while, of like, oh, so am I going to do that service anymore, or is that going to change as well? And like, obviously people kind of dropping off the radar and clients disappearing. The first probably month or so was really chaotic, but then I quite liked the fact that no one seemed to expect anything from you, because it was like, oh, there's a pandemic going on, nobody knows what's happening, so there were no standards and there was nothing really to be done in that first kind of 2-month period. So that was kind of nice to just take a step back. But having said that, I didn't really step back. I still tried to like trudge my way through it, which on reflection was probably a mistake. I probably should have given myself a bit of time to just muse and to reflect. But I jumped into saving the world mode and like, it's okay, everyone, let's all just like keep the group together. And I was working with an accelerator group at the time. So we would organize group calls and kind of keep each other ticking over and keep each other motivated and stuff. And there was a real desire to keep going and whichever way we could and just to push through it, which was great. And I don't regret that at all, but I do regret that I didn't take probably as much time as I needed for myself just to process it, because that all hit me a couple of months later, and it was a bit of a shock when it did hit, because by then everybody was kind of used to working from home and stuff, and I was like, why am I struggling? And it's because I hadn't processed the trauma and everything. But live and learn.
I can see that if you didn't have that, because I mean I think a lot of people found the third lockdown quite hard because everything was, I think the novelty had worn off by that point. But the thing that I found was as we were coming out of the first lockdown, and there was all stuff like, so the schools had reopened, but they did kind of say, you're supposed to send your kids to school, but if you don't, no one's going to come around and have a word. And I was like, seriously, I've not had to make a decision for 3 months.
Yeah.
And the first decision that you asked... Yeah, the first decision you asked me to make is about my child's well-being. It's like, can you not just ask me, like, I don't know, what kind of sandwich do I want? Something like a little bit more
start me off slowly.
That's right. It was, so being able to kind of... But there was definitely something kind of cocooning about the idea that actually a lot of decisions... I think it shows how difficult decision-making is, how when they're taken out, I think you can really notice the strain that takes. And no one really ever explains that kind of cognitive overhead on a daily basis is actually very stressful.
Yeah, it's just massively draining. It's like you're doing a workout all the time, because that's effectively what your brain is doing. Your brain is constantly ticking over, processing information, doing. And this is why things like mindfulness and meditation are so great for us. Like I've got to admit, I'm not the world's best meditator, but I like to let my mind wander. I like to go on walks and just kind of pay attention to things and just be mindful and just try and switch off a little bit, because it's the only chance that you get. Unless you're intentional about it, you will just block your day with things. You've got to give yourself almost these like white noise zones where you can just let your mind wander, because that's how it processes the information properly and kind of sorts through it and goes, oh, well, that was relevant, that wasn't, let that shit go, and focus on that, don't focus on that, stop overthinking that. You have to take these like regular moments to check in, even if it's just a few minutes a day. You can't just keep going like we used to. Like in the before COVID, people were more inclined to just trudge and just kind of churn, and we've all learned the hard way, but learn we did, that we have to take a different approach, and a different approach can be healthier and better for us.
I think also there was something about the pace of life in the before time that was, so things like, I don't know, commuting, or people would have space where they kind of had to, even if they didn't realise they were kind of reflecting or letting the mind wander, or however you want to think about it, but actually your mind couldn't easily be gainfully employed while you're being crushed between sort of 600 people in a tube carriage. So there was a certain amount of kind of mental downtime. We don't have to like spend 45 minutes jammed into a stranger's armpit now, but
unless you really want to, what you do between two consenting adults is
yeah, and you can find it in a different place, although I guess you probably got to wear a mask. But nowadays there's the commute's gone and everyone's going, great, I don't have to do the commute anymore, I can use that time to be useful. And I think it's really interesting how our default is, we've got this time back, how can I use it to be useful, as opposed to how could I use it to relax more, or to give myself some space.
And I think there's a danger in that, to be honest. I think we can be a bit overly prescriptive with our time now, because previously we were more aware of the fact that, oh, I've got this meeting on this side of town, I'm on this side of town, I need to commute. If I'm running a few minutes late, I'm already a few minutes late, maybe I'll just take a few more minutes to just kind of take a few breaths before I go into that meeting, whatever it was. Like, people expected that there's going to be this kind of fluff time built into your day, and people were very accepting of that. Now, though, I feel like our day could be over diarized to the point where it's like, oh, I have a podcast recording here, and then I have another virtual meeting here, and there's 20 minutes in between. So in that time, I'm going to go and get food, and I'm going to talk to my spouse, and I'm going to go for a walk, and I'm going to da 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 da. It's almost like we can be too inclined to go in the direction of gross over productivity now, because we're not very forgiving of ourselves, because we're like, oh, it's all virtual, so there's no excuse for lateness, and there's no excuse not to be able to do all the things at the prescribed time. And we've lost that kind of, I call it the fluff time, but it really is, you know, commuting can be great for decompressing, and it can, depending on the quality of your commute, obviously. But I used to use it as like podcast time, and I still do go to a co-working space in town because I like the separation. I like being out of my house. I like having that time to decompress and to kind of rethink a conversation I just had, or even just to have a conversation with someone in the kitchen at work. I really missed that during the height of the lockdown. And yeah, for people that have kind of gone to working from home full time, I would prompt people to try and have that discussion with your employer if it's at all possible to have at least a hybrid model. I don't really think a lot of people want to go back to the office full time, but equally, I don't really think most people want to work from home full time. And it's a conversation that needs to be had, because we could over focus on productivity and just say, oh, well, everybody's able to work from home, therefore it's cheaper, therefore we should definitely do it. But that's not necessarily a well-being centric approach, and that's not necessarily what's going to be best in the long run. I think we could over focus on, yeah, this has worked during the pandemic, oh great, let's save a load of money and just have everyone work from home. I feel like we haven't given this a long enough test to know if it's useful long term, and if it's healthy long term as well, because a lot of us will get really anxious and antisocial if we're working from home all the time, I think.
And to your point as well about, you know, seeing somebody who you wouldn't necessarily have planned to see by bumping him into a kitchen or whatever like that. That time, I mean, really, over the last year, we haven't seen anyone that we hadn't pre-arranged to see.
Yeah, totally.
Everything's been pre-arranged, and the amount of that kind of serendipity that you get from like the casual meeting where you run into somebody and that sparks an idea. There's something creative in that you don't get through. You can get a lot more done via Zoom, I think, than we thought before, but there is some stuff that it doesn't do very well, such as randomly bumping you into somebody. Although I hear it's a feature they're working on.
Could you imagine that if they had a breakout room and it links together like 100 different Zoom calls, so it's completely random who you happen to run into? That'd be really cool.
Like, hi, not seen you for ages. Who are you?
Are you Japan? Amazing.
So, moving on a little bit from what you wish you'd known sooner, we're thinking about now something that made a difference to you. So, I started this off with the question originally being a book that changed things for you, but not everyone's a big reader, so it's like a book or a concept but something that made a big difference to you, was a bit of a turning point in your life.
Yeah, I kind of went down the route of meaning, like I mentioned earlier. One of my favorite books of all time is Man's Search for Meaning. I don't know if you've read it, by Viktor Frankl.
Yeah.
Super tiny little book, but people kept recommending it to me at a certain time in my life. And I was like, why is everybody talking to me about this bloody book? So I picked it up, and it was one of those game-changing books. It came at exactly the right time. Like I was at a really low point in my life, and it gave me the gift of perspective, really. So for people that don't know this book, it's by a psychoanalyst called, well, he developed his own form of psychotherapy called logotherapy, I think. But he was a guy who was sent to concentration camps, including Auschwitz, and he wrote about his experiences after he got out of the camps, and he wrote about how people survived and why they survived. And it was really interesting to hear his thoughts on it. So it's a really cheery read, as you can imagine. But his observation was the only people that survived through the concentration camps were people who could attach a sense of meaning to everything they were going through. So it wasn't the case that made the experience enjoyable by any stretch. It was still hell on earth. But the observation he made was the people who survived were the ones who, even if they knew it was a lie, they would tell themselves, my wife is waiting for me on the other side, my children need me, I need to get out of here. And they gave themselves a sense of purpose through the pain that they were experiencing. And it wasn't that guaranteed that you survive, but all of the people that survived had that one thing in common. And it was just such a fascinating read. It really gives you perspective, because obviously whatever time in your life and whatever you're going through, and you read that book, you cannot help but be moved and be completely inspired by these people that survive probably one of the worst atrocities we'll ever know. And then the other side of it is the strength and the power of having a sense of meaning in your life. It can get you through such ridiculous odds. And it was just, I was really young when I read that book. I was like in my mid-20s, and it's a book I keep recommending on to other people and saying, just once in your life, please read it, because it spoke to me on a very deep level. And that idea of finding meaning in things now, I don't profess to know all the answers. I'm not one of these people that's like, the meaning of life is obviously this, buy my course and I'll tell you what it is. It's not that. It's just kind of, I live my life now in a way where I trust that there is a point, even if I can't see it, even if I'm not smart enough to know what the answer is. I just kind of believe that there is a point behind it, and maybe it will reveal itself on the journey at some point.
I'm glad. I'm glad you brought that book up, actually, because my experience with that book was very similar. I only read it in the last few years, so I didn't read it at such a I guess formative point in my life, I suppose. But I had a similar experience where everybody just kept recommending it to me. It just kept coming up, and it was mentioned a lot in the. I guess because of the link with purpose, and a lot of the lean process improvement stuff that I was reading, it gets linked. That gets brought up as kind of like I suppose, the ultimate text on purpose and having a reason for being. And I resisted it for such a long time. I think just because of the subject matter, because it's because reading, I don't have as much time for reading as I used to when I commuted, and you're kind of like, how am I gonna feel about reading that? And in the end, when I looked at it, was like, okay, actually, it is a really short book, and everybody keeps telling me to read it. And yeah, I'm really glad that I kind of got myself in a sort of position where I thought, actually, I can devote some time to this and should devote some time to it, because it's very powerful, and it's a really interesting kind of dissection of that idea that we're beings that need purpose, and that purpose drives our decisions and our and actually provides a motivation, which links into a lot of other sort of theories about what drives us as people. And number one is kind of being part of something that's larger than ourselves.
Yeah,
I suppose.
That's the thing. I don't think he wrote it as a spiritual text by any stretch, but the meaning I kind of took from it was almost that spiritual idea of, we're not just ourselves. We don't just exist in isolation. We are part of something bigger. And whether you can see it and feel it and you can identify it, it doesn't really matter. It's more like I said, the faith and the trust that it is true. And that's a very comforting thought. So I think it spoke to me in a way. It was just very comforting to read, even despite the subject matter. I think he makes it quite accessible. So I heard it was kind of a Holocaust biography, and I was like, oh great, that's going to be quite heavy going. But he presents everything in such a matter-of-fact way that you can kind of read through it and not delve too much into the atrocities. If you want to be kind of one step removed from it, you can kind of read it that way, because he's just like, oh, and then another dead body was thrown on the pile. Anyway, I went to go and like dig my hole, and there's almoys like a weird dry sense of humor undertone to it, so you can kind of remove yourself from it. So I definitely recommend it to anyone that is intrigued by it. It's a super quick read, and it's just it's very formative as a text. It's a very formative read, and it's one I keep kind of going back to every few years. I just dip into it and I go, oh, okay, everything seems to make sense, and like whatever I'm going through, it's not as bad a day as he's having. So perspective is a good thing.
And how do you think that's affected what you've done since? How's man's search for meaning made a difference to the way that you do things and go about your life and your work?
It made me really think about living my life with a bit of intention. So rather than just going through the motions and just doing things because it's the done way and that's just what you do. I always had a bit of a problem with my jobs when I was going through, because I went to uni and then I couldn't get a graduate scheme, and I really struggled to find my place in the world and to find a job that kind of spoke to me. And that book made me realize, I think the reason I didn't enjoy any of the jobs I did is because I was just doing them because they were there. It was just kind of, I took the easy option all the time, and it was like, oh, you work in this job, they've offered you a promotion, sure, do it, see what you can learn. And like, there is good that comes from that. You can get a load of experience you would never have expected. But I was very much being kind of dragged along in a lot of respects, rather than actually making my own decisions and going, okay, how do I want to approach this? What kind of intention do I want to bring to this? So reading that book, it kind of made me take that step back and just be like, well, what do you want to do? You have ultimate control. You're not, restricted in the way that these people in this book are so heavily restricted. Like, you have the choice to do anything that you want within reason. What are you going to do with that? And it was kind of quite liberating to think in those terms for the first time. Scary as well, because like you said about responsibility earlier and decision making, there's a power that comes from knowing how autonomous you are, but it's also scary if you've never done it before, because you're suddenly like, shit, what do I do with my abilities? What do I do out in the world? But it just got me a bit more curious and a bit more, it got me to be a bit more of a director in my own life rather than like a side character in this kind of play that was unfolding, or this film. It got me to be like, right, I'm the director. I can decide now. I can choose and choose differently from what I'm doing now. So yeah, definitely got me to be a bit more intentional and helped me grow up a little bit as well, rather than just being like, oh, well, at university they told me I could do this, and in college they told me you could do this. And I was very much a product of being an overachiever in school, because when you're in school, and if you're an overachiever, I feel like they just tell you about exams and get you to pass the next exam, and it's all that very clear path laid out for you. And then when you go into the real world and that's removed, it's really disorienting. I hated it, and I was, like I said, I was lost for a really long time. And it's not like that book found me. It's not like, oh, I suddenly understand anything, but it was that kind of awareness of, I can figure shit out and I can do it for myself. No one is coming to save me. This is my responsibility right now.
And I suppose without that, you kind of drift and you end up doing, whatever you've found or wherever you are, and that's fine. But then at the same time, there's a sense that people do some like weird stuff for their jobs.
Yeah.
People do some really odd things, and none of that is in those career questionnaires that you do when you're at school.
No.
And so, I met a guy at a network thing who was a horse whisperer, honest to goodness horse whisperer.
Wow.
Who works with traumatized children. He uses horses to help traumatized children build trust and rapport. I can't imagine that like appeared in that thing the government did last year to help people retrain. I was going to be a florist apparently. Yes, but I think as well there's this sense that, without wishing to sound too American about it, you can kind of be whatever you want to be once you've decided you want to be it. But in order to identify what that is, you've got to work out what you stand for, what your meaning is, and why you're doing it.
It's a weird one. I've never quite decided which comes first. For me, it's kind of chicken and eggy. It's some people have to do stuff to learn stuff, and I definitely think there's an element of that to me. Like, I do need to go through this kind of disqualification process of like, right, I tried that, I definitely don't like that, and I kind of rule stuff out. But then you get to a certain point where it's like, okay, you figured out what you don't want. Now what do you want? And that was kind of the tipping point where Man's Search for Meaning found me, and it kind of met me where I was at. And I think if you ask anyone what their favorite book is, I think that holds true. That idea of it finds you at the exact right time and it speaks to you on a level that it wouldn't have impacted you if it had met you a year before or a year after that point. So I don't know if everybody like needs to have a sense of meaning to have a fulfilled life. I don't think that can be true, because I see so many people that don't seem to have that, but they're just happy to roll with it. But I think certainly for my personality type, I'm quite a kind of I have quite a serious side to me, which is silly when you look at like my branding and like the badassery and the bright yellow and things like that. But underneath all of that, like there is a serious side to me, and I do like to think very deeply, and I do like to feel like, what is the point of all of this? And so for me to try and operate when I was younger, for me to try and operate without that, it was like rudderless, and I felt just like, what is the point? I felt that kind of hopelessness and that despair from not really understanding. So I don't know if it's the one correct way to live your life. I suspect it won't be right for everyone, and that'll feel too like intimidating. So I wouldn't want to be as arrogant as to say that's what you need, but certainly for me that was the missing ingredient that I hadn't recognized up until that point.
We're talking a little bit now for the next couple of questions about your, I guess you could call it your workflow if you like, or the things that make a difference to your life in a more practical sense, things that make your life easier. And I'd like you to talk a little bit now about a tool that you can't live without, or something you use every day, something that's like absolutely pivotal to your daily workflow. What you got?
I was so excited when I saw this question because there are a couple of things I use that are essential for not just my business but my life generally. So number one, especially for my business, is Calendly. I absolutely love using Calendly. So it's a very basic tool to schedule stuff in your calendar, and you can send people the link and say, hey, here's my calendar, here's my availability, book yourself a slot. And you can sync it to things like Zoom. So if they book a slot, it generates automatically a Zoom meeting. And then I use another app called Zapier, which is like an automation tool. So once Zapier sees that the Zoom meeting has been allocated and they've booked it, it sends a notification to my iCalendar, which puts it in my iCalendar and sends me an email to tell me that it's in my calendar. So I can look at my emails and be like, oh, someone's booked a Zoom call at this time. Cool. And everything's just synced, and it just makes my life feel so much easier. When you send people a Calendly link, they think you're the most organized person on the planet, which I love. And I'm like, no, the reason I use Calendly is because I'm very disorganized. So that is my number one. If you work for yourself, I say definitely get yourself some kind of digital calendar software. Others are available, but I think Calendar, I pay about £12 a month, and it's just changed the game for me. It's so much easier.
There's a whole thing with, like, especially pinging dates backwards and forwards to people just takes so much time.
I just feel like it's so old fashioned now. If someone says, okay, I have this time available on this day and this, something like a big long list, and like my brain just doesn't really understand a big long list of things like that. Whereas if you show me a physical calendar with like little colored dots and I can pick and choose, like, it just makes sense. Everything makes more sense with Calendly. I feel like everything's going to be okay as long as I'm using Calendly. And it's nice, it all syncs with your calendars and stuff, so it can see if you haven't changed your Calendly but it sees in your calendar that you've got something else on, it won't double book stuff if you set it up correctly. So yeah, it's just made things so much easier. There were two more things that I use that I highly recommend.
Go for it.
Canva, which is graphic design software. So they have a free user level that literally anyone you follow on Instagram probably uses Canva. It's just really, like you were saying about bringing fun and making things enjoyable when you're producing content. Canva has really helped me to do that. So I produce all of my social media content through Canva. I do all of my presentations through Canva now as well. So I design it all in Canva and then I import it over to the PowerPoint now. Just make it a bit more on brand and a bit more fun. And I paid for the higher user level because they had better graphics, and I thought, why not treat yourself? So definitely recommend Canva for anything design related. It just makes everything way more fun. And then the third thing is do not disturb on my phone. It is
okay.
90% of the time, if you ring me, you will not get through because I use do not disturb probably more of the day than not now, because I realized how bad interruptions are for your well-being and your workflow. Like I can't abide when I'm in the middle of something and I'm getting into flow and I'm optimizing my time and I'm feeling like, yes, I'm getting it, I'm making a breakthrough here. And then someone rings me or a notification pings off, and just turning off the notifications wasn't doing it for me, because every now and then I touch the screen, I'll be like, oh, what's happening? And like the phone still lights up when you get notifications through, but do not disturb, it doesn't do that. And I was like, oh. It started off, I put it on at 10 p.m. till 10 a.m. so that no one would disturb my sleep. But now it's almost like an addiction. I'm like, how long can I do not disturb in a day? And yeah, it's kind of cool because sometimes clients will ring and then they'll think like, oh, you're really busy, you must be on another call or something. And I'm like, yes, of course. usually I am. I have a lot of phone calls and stuff in a day. So I always turn my phone on do not disturb. Like if I'm giving a podcast interview like this, it's on do not disturb. And it's a game changer, honestly. The improvement to my concentration and my peace of mind is just, I highly recommend it to anybody.
It's surprising as well when you get a distraction like that, quite how much of your attention it pulls, even if it's just like something lighting up, then you didn't even need to be reading it. It pulls your attention away from whatever it is you're doing. And then if you, God forbid, do get actually pulled into looking at the thing, then it can take you ages to get back to, especially if you're like at a good level of productivity, it can take you ages to get back to that level.
Oh, it's ridiculous. And it's frustrating. And it's one of those things where I always like, hate the other person a little bit, even if it's like a really dear friend and they're phoning and I'm like, oh, I'm so glad you called, this is great, and part of my brain hates them a little bit, and it's just not good for anyone. It ruins your relationships. Like I never, it's very rare that I ring anyone now because I just feel so bad about, I don't want to infringe on their time. I respect their time so much and I want them to have a good, productive, happy day and all the rest of it. So I think, and it kind of buddies nicely with Calendly because I'll go on Calendly and I'll schedule calls with people rather than just say to people, I never give my number out and just be like, oh, call me anytime, day or night. It's like, no, my time is so limited. And I'm not trying to say like, oh my God, I'm so fancy and better than everyone. We're all like that. Like all of our time is precious. And the more you can figure out how to dull the noise and how to stop the chaos, the better you'll be in each of your things. Like I'm not distracted right now when I'm talking to you because I'm only talking to you. I don't have my emails pinging off in the distance. I don't have my phone ringing and go, oh, sorry, I'll just turn that off and forgetting the chain of thought. Like you have my full attention right now. So this podcast will be the best it can be at this moment in time with my energy levels the way it is today, free of distraction. And I think that's how we all should be in our conversations. It's like we said about mindfulness earlier. The best way to be present with people is to be fully present with people, and we can't do it if our fucking tech is going off every 5 seconds. We just can't do it. So
I worked out how to use the shortcuts thing on my phone so that it switches do not disturb on when I open Zoom.
That's cool.
So, and that was really helpful just because there was, I would occasionally, I was fine. I would just occasionally get a notification that would pop down when I was on Zoom, and I would just, like you say, I'd completely lose my train of thought. It would, and it'd be something really like, you know, a new podcast is available or something. And even though it wasn't interesting and it wasn't diverting enough to really pull my attention off to it, it was enough to make me lose my train of thought.
Yeah.
So I've not tried going quite cold turkey and switching it on the whole time, but actually just picking apps where I know that if I'm opening that, I definitely don't want to be disturbed, and it flicking on and then flicking off when I close the app is super, super helpful.
That's really cool. I never used Zoom on my phone, but I could see how that would be useful. Just the level of automation on our phones is staggering sometimes. It's such a hack. Once you figure out a few automations that you can do, I do it with clients all the time. I say, you know, just try this one thing and see how much brain time it gives you back. So they'll try one thing. So say Calendly. I was talking with one of my clients about Calendly the other day, and I was like, just try it for a week, just see what happens. And it was baffling to her, like how many hours of her day she retained from not going back and forth on emails, like you said. And once you make one change, that amount of brain space, say you give yourself back like 2% brain power, what can you do with an extra 2% brain power? You can make another better decision that gets you to like 10% brain power. And it's like all these things compound over the course of a day. So they sound like nothing in the moment, but the hours that you save, and it's not about like optimizing your time for the sake of being the most productive machine that you can be, because I think that's bullshit, and I think that's really toxic to think in that way. But if you're making your own life easier, you feel better for doing it, and then you can spend time doing things that you actually want to be doing. Like when you're out with friends, you can have a dinner and have a conversation with them without feeling like, oh crap, I need to catch up on my emails, or oh no, you don't have that sense of panic of like, I have somewhere else to be, I have something else to do, because you're giving everything the kind of allocated time that it needs.
Yeah, it's like feeling when you're reading a book and you get to the bottom of a page and you realise you've not taken in anything that you've read because you're thinking about something else.
That's the great analogy, yes. And that happens so often, doesn't it? You read it 5 or 6 times, you're like, I must read this book because it's so good. And then it's like, well, you're obviously not in the right place for that book right now. You need to go sleep or something and come back.
Or go and do the thing that's bothering you. There's the couple of things that I found I could use the automation for, which are kind of the opposite. So if you think about kind of getting stuff done, you know, achieving things, is kind of sometimes about removing friction. Actually, you could also use the automation stuff for adding friction to things that you want to stop doing.
Totally, yes, great shout.
So I put a thing where it would, for some apps such as, I don't know, Twitter or whatever, where I could find I would just be in it and I'd been in it for 10 minutes and I don't even remember opening it. I'm not even sure why I picked up my phone. But apparently I'm cross about Donald Trump or whatever again. And there's so I just put an automation on that where I would open the app and it would pause for 30 seconds. And and there was just a cancel button, so I could either wait for 30 seconds, or I could just cancel it and go back to do whatever I did before.
So great. That's a great idea. And does it stop you using it? Do you normally cancel it, do you think?
I do, yeah, because I'll have opened it just out of habit.
Yeah.
And the other one that I found was as a bit of an extension for that. I started keeping a list of things that I could do on my phone in like a minute or 2 minutes that I called my instead of Twitter list. And so what it would do is when I opened Twitter, it would pop that list up first.
That's cool. What were some of the other things you had?
So it'd be things like, I don't know, if I was gonna buy a refill for my pen off Amazon, or I was gonna research is my wife's birthday coming up, and I was gonna research what present I was gonna get for her or something. Just things like that you could do, or just like I needed to pause my coffee delivery because I've got too many coffee beans at the moment. Things like that, and I'd just be like, oh, okay, I've got my phone and I've opened Twitter without meaning to. I could actually do this job.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's like you still get the dopamine hit, but it's kind of a bigger dopamine hit because it's a slightly longer job compared to your tweets and stuff. It's a slightly longer job, but you get a bigger dopamine hit, so you enjoy it more. And it's, God, that's so clever. Yeah, putting the barrier in your way to stop you. It's like when you're on a diet, isn't it? And you hide all the good food, like the fun food, you hide it all day. So,
yeah, well, you put it on a really high shelf, so you have to go and get a chair, and it's just like,
yeah.
So
yeah, and then by the time you've gone and thought about it, you've kind of given your kind of cognitive brain a chance to catch up with your animal brain and go, do you really want that? Do we really want that? Invariably, yes, but at least you thought about it.
We're incredibly lazy, like, beings, really. I think any degree of friction, that's one of the things that I kind of learnt from doing like process mapping and process redesign with people in companies, is that sometimes stuff's not happening just because it's like just a little bit too difficult.
Yeah.
It's not even that it's particularly hard. It's just like that takes me, like, opening this particular app to put in my expenses takes, just opening the app takes 45 seconds. So yeah. I just don't bother.
Yeah.
It's
so true. But it's like we were saying earlier, like our modern lives are so chaotic and there's so much going on that every little decision takes it out of us. It's really draining. And that's why it's so hard to be an adult. I really do think a lot of it is down to the decision fatigue and having to do this, and should I do this or should I do this? So we just do the thing that's the easiest because it's the path of least resistance, even if it's something that harms us. Like you go for a cigarette without thinking about it because that's just what you do. You don't think about the long-term implications. You do it because it's easier in the moment, because that'll get you through the next hour with the nightmare boss or whatever. And it's not that we're stupid or anything. It's just that life is hard enough and we just want to make it easier for ourselves. So it's a really important thing to be aware of these things that we do and to think about how we can kind of hack it in a better direction, because as much as we want to do the things that are immediately gratifying, some of them are obviously more harmful than helpful, but we've got to take away that layer of judgment that comes with it, because it is, like you said, it's very much ingrained into us and built into us as humans, as animals. We are wired to do the easy thing and to do the most comforting thing to keep us safe. So it's hard to make kind of sensible grown-up decisions to help ourselves along, but we are capable at the same time. We definitely can do that. It's about kind of gaming the system and the game in a way that we can win.
Absolutely, yes. That's I've not actually thought about gamifying my life, but now I'm actually thinking about
doesn't that make it sound more fun?
yeah it's just like make myself a cup of coffee and something explodes into coins. That's what we need. So what was the last really useful thing you bought or acquired?
I really struggled with this question for ages. I was like, what do I buy anymore? I feel like I never buy anything that's not food. And it's like, food is useful, but I couldn't get excited about that question because I was like, I just don't know. It gave me a complex. But then I realized a lot of things that I buy that are useful are more like services, more so than products. So I'm not one for like buying stuff, because like I think you can see in my background, I have enough stuff. Like if I'm going to buy anything, it's going to be a book, but I have enough books. So I'm like withdrawing slowly from my book addiction. But one thing I have invested in a lot at the moment is health related things. So now that everything is opening back up and it's easier to access health services, I'm going for acupuncture later because I get really bad migraines, and I don't know why acupuncture works, but it just works, and it works for 6 months at a time. So that's a tip for anyone that gets migraines that can't find anything to take the edge off. I find that really helps. And similarly, I've had some gut health problems that have worried me for about 6 years. And I felt like when I was going through the traditional kind of healthcare process, I was only treating the symptoms. I wasn't getting to the root of the problem. And even the things that were helping the symptoms didn't help all the time. So I felt like there was something more going on. And it finally got to that point where I was like, I am sick of being sick now. So I got some gut health tests done, and apparently I have parasites, which is delightful. I'm with parasites, harboring some little fugitives, so eating for 200. I don't even know, but yeah, apparently they've been there for ages, and it explains a lot about the health problems I've been having. So that was incredibly useful to have those tests done. Incredibly useful. But yeah, I'm not really one for spending money on stuff, but if I'm gonna invest in it, I like to invest in myself. So if it's like training or something that will help my health. But annoyingly, I had to get to the point where I was so like, I was at the point of like, this is unbearable now before I did it. I just wish I'd done it a few years ago, really.
With hindsight, it's always easy to do that. I think there's something there about getting to the root cause rather than just treating the symptoms, though, isn't there? As again, it's part of the human condition. I think that if something's not actively hurting at this point, then does it need? We probably take far better care of our phones and like cars and things than we do of our bodies a lot of the time, because they don't they don't rattle in the same way.
That's so interesting. I think we're really good with preventative maintenance, or kind of standard maintenance. Like I remember when I worked in the coffee shop, we used to have all these maintenance checks that we did. So we did preventative maintenance on the coffee machine and on the filter and on the water supply. We had all these people coming in. Like I said to my area manager one day, quite soon after I'd been made the manager, I said, like, we're spending so much money on this maintenance. Like there's nothing wrong with the machine. Why are we wasting money on it? And he turned around and he said, the reason you don't have any problems is because you're spending that £300 a month, get it done. And I was just, it was a real learning point, because I didn't really understand what he meant. But then I saw in another store that didn't keep on top of their preventative maintenance, they had to do reactionary maintenance, and the bills that they got from that in the tens of thousands to replace the coffee machine. And I was like, I get it. And it took me years again to apply it to my own life, but exactly the same is true for humans. Like we need to keep on top of our mental health, our physical health. And even when it comes to things like your daily routine and the way that you know, the people that you hang out with, you might think, oh, it'll be such a drama if I cut that person off. And we kind of make that decision of like, what's more painful in the moment. And I think having a difficult conversation feels really painful, so we avoid it. But then sometimes you need to have a difficult conversation, and you need to cut off the toxic person, or you need to have that breakup in order for everything else to improve. And it's that kind of, again, we're wired to do the simple thing. We're wired to take the route that we know. And we're so conditioned to think that change is scary and scary equals bad. But you know, we're quite imaginative as a species. We are able to think about different solutions to different problems, and we don't have to do things just because that's the way we've always done it. We can think differently. We can make better decisions for ourselves, but it takes brain power. It takes a little bit of bravery. It takes a bit of gutsiness to say, actually, enough is enough, before the point of hitting a crisis and having, you know, something makes you need to stop. It takes a lot of self-awareness to say, actually, let me do myself a favor, in fact, to use your turn of phrase. Do yourself a favor and make that decision before you have to.
And that's a very nice segue into my final question, which is to complete that sentence.
I actually had a slightly different answer. Could I offer a second?
Of course you can. Yeah, I was hoping that you'd not just already done it without the build-up. So yeah, complete the sentence. Do yourself a favor and
stop being a dick to yourself, because I think so many of us are ruthlessly, ridiculously dickheaded and mean to ourselves without maybe even realizing that we're doing it. It just happens in tiny little subtle ways. Like you'll be a bit self-deprecating and you'll say, oh, I'm just at that, oh, how funny, and you might make a joke, but then that joke goes on a little bit too long, or you make that same joke too many times, or you'll put yourself down in front of a potential client, or like all these little tiny things. It might not feel like you're being a bully or that you're being an outward, like, horrendous person, but they do chip away at you. They chip away at your self-esteem. And I did it for many, many years before anybody picked me up on it. And now I surround myself with really cool, really good cheerleaders and people who are always quick to jump in when they think, you're being a bit of a dick to yourself there. Could you speak a bit more nicely? Could you reframe that? Could you think about it in a different way? And I think it's something that it can be a bit sneaky if we don't pick up on it and if we don't spot it in ourselves. I think it's important to surround yourself with good people who can spot that in you, because I always think I'm quite neutral, if nothing else. I don't try and be, I'm not from the self-love brigade of like, oh my God, love yourself. And I love that kind of ideology, but that ain't me. I can't, it doesn't speak to me. But I can very much get on board with being an ally to myself and tolerating myself. And yeah, I've got a lot of good people around me who can pick up on when I'm not being that. So do yourself a favor and stop being a dick to yourself is my answer, Tim.
That's fantastic. I think there's something about the limiting beliefs that we accept ourselves quite quickly, and sometimes there's a fine line between self-awareness and being a dick to yourself.
Yes,
it's fine to recognize that something isn't your strength, and sometimes it's very helpful to recognize that, say, something isn't a strength. But to then actively turn that into a weakness or a failing through repeatedly telling you you can't do it is then when it becomes difficult. So I think it's difficult it can be easy for self-awareness to trip over into something that's more negative and more damaging.
And I think the generation below myself, like the Gen Zers, they have the highest self-awareness out of any of us, and it can be a real strength if you channel it in the correct kind of way. But I think they're in a dangerous place, really, because they're so self-aware to the point where they're almost overly anxious and scared of doing anything sometimes, because they look at social media and look at what other people are doing and they go, oh, well, I could do that, or I could do that, and I could do that. And they get that information overload to the point where they can't make any decisions. So yeah, it's important to learn how to channel your self-awareness and how to turn it into a strength. And that couples with things like self-acceptance and self-acknowledgement, being able to recognize everything that you have achieved and everything that you are good at, and to be able to really champion yourself, not to just draw lines under things that you're like, that's bad, that's bad, that's bad. Maybe not even ascribing a meaning to things and saying that's bad, just to say, oh, that's interesting. That's an interesting thing about myself. I wonder what that means and where that could go. And, we can invest in all types of services and content and stuff to that effect, to do that level of self-inquiry and to see it as a fun process rather than, oh my God, I hate spending time with myself. It's scary and it's bad. Like, personal growth can be really challenging, but can be really amazing and really liberating as well. So yeah, very much a fan of that way of thinking.
Well, this has been a lot of fun, Alice. Thank you for your time. How can people find you? Where do they find you?
I'm all over Instagram and LinkedIn. So if they just look for Alice Lyons on LinkedIn or Dark Coffee Wellbeing on Instagram, I'm definitely going to be in those two places.
Excellent. So for your dose of badassery, then you know where to go. But thank you very much, and we'll see you again next time. You've been listening to Do Yourself a Favour, the podcast about learning from experience and the things we do to make our lives easier. Brought to you by Make Work Work Better. My name's Tim Sisney from Make Work Work Better. Our theme tune is by the Titanics. Talk to you again soon.